When it comes to Noah Baumbach's films, he has quite a wide but distinct visual style, even though he's worked with a multitude of cinematographers who also have their own distinct style. Now, it's interesting to me that he hasn't stuck with a cinematographer as most modern auteurs have. Tarantino has Robert Richardson, Wes Anderson has Robert Yeoman, Paul Thomas Anderson has Robert Elswit, and Luca Guadagnino has Saryanbu Muktiprom. Yet, getting to Baumbach, he really hasn't stayed with a DP for more than 2 films. But we can still tell when we are watching a film of his, and it's not just because it stars Greta Gerwig or Adam Driver, and that's what I want to look at today. But I'm more looking at how Robbie Ryan went about shooting Marriage Story, by looking at the equipment he used, the lighting style he went after, his use of movement and composition, as well as the overall look, and how it compares to other Baumbach films.
Someone to hold you too close, someone to hurt you too deep.
With digital, you have to go to considerable lengths through lighting, exposure, LUTs, and the final grade before you can even get near to a filmic looking result. If you want a filmic looking result, it's much easier to start with film. Robbie Ryan has repeatedly said that he loves analog, as do most cinematographers. But like most, you don't really get to choose unless you're Deakins or Richardson, and even then, one prefers digital. So he was very happy when Baumbach wanted to shoot Marriage Story on 35. Now, camera-wise, as of recent, Ryan seems to favourite the Arri-Cam LT and ST. However, here he also opted for an Arriflex 435. All of these are really solid cameras though. With the LT and ST, you have an amazing mix of a studio camera perfect for sticks, a dolly or a crane, and a lightweight version ideal for handheld. Now, when it comes to the 435, this is an MOS designed camera, meaning that it's too loud to be used for dialogue scenes, making it ideal for second unit work, special effects work, and if you need to, shoot in reverse. He then decided to pair these with Panavision's Primo lenses, with a wide set of focal lengths, solid t-stop of 1.9 across the board with a couple of 1.8s thrown in there, high contrast, high resolution look, and pristine image quality. You really can't go wrong unless you are after a distinct style. They are also designed for use with film and digital cameras, so if you wanted to, you could go and attach these to your T3i if you found an EF mount. As for the stock, Ryan went with the trusty Kodak Vision 3 200T 5213 and 500T 5219. The undeniable value of film is that it always delivers a solid and aesthetically pleasing image straight out of the camera. I love the matching natural looking colour palettes and textures of the Kodak 5219 and 5213 tungsten stocks, and their gorgeous rendition of colour, especially on skin tones, has yet to be bettered. The lighting style is vital when it comes to creating a mood in a film. I'd say apart from the use of colour, it's also the easiest way to invoke a certain mood. Go low key and we have the aura of mystery, or maybe you want to use practicals and then you can tell the audience about the character through the light you use. The opportunities are really endless when it comes to lighting, however in a film like this where there's a lot of natural light, it gets a bit more complicated. To start, unlike in The Favourite, Ryan did actually use some artificial light in this. Well, he had to, whether it was through a subtle field light, practicals around the house, or a strong spotlight on the stage. Now, as I can't find any articles where Ryan talks specifically about lighting, I'm mainly going off speculation with this, but with the fact that he took inspiration from Cries and Whispers in its use of natural light, and the fact that he did The Favourite a year before, I think it's safe to assume that there's more natural light here than you'd originally think. Just by taking a look at some of the behind the scenes shots, there is minimal artificial light in the rooms. When we get to the courtrooms and whatnot, Ryan would have probably replaced the bulbs in the ceiling, but there seems to be a really minimal amount of modification going on. This really isn't a hindrance though. Ryan specialises in natural light, and here he's made the film feel raw, almost like it's a documentary, but with a much stronger look and narrative. Next we get on to moving the camera, and luckily this is a much simpler topic, especially for film set in rooms. Now starting off, there really isn't much movement in this film. We have the odd dolly shot, we often pan and tilt with them. However, by far the most prominent camera movement is when Ryan opts for handheld, and this really elevates the natural look he was going for. I mean, what's more personal than being with the actors and moving with them physically? It also allows us as an audience to slip into the world of Charlie and Nicole. During production of the Merowitz stories, Noah proved a big fan of keeping the camera motivated, and we did a lot of dolly moves to that effect, but Marriage Story was necessarily different. Now, this moves us quite nicely into the use of composition, which in any film is important, obviously, but here, where they don't move the camera as much, it's especially so. Ryan had to really think about how he frames the faces, what emotion he wanted to create, and just how to make it interesting without moving the camera. As a lot of the action is set in lawyers' offices, which by their nature are scruffy, not very big, nor visually interesting spaces, we could not move the camera so much, so the framing was much more about achieving satisfying compositions and more static portraiture of the characters in the buttoned-down, antiseptic world of attorneys. So how did he do this? Well, he looked towards films like Persona, which have inspired cinematographers for decades on how to compose a face. He blocked characters in a way that there is still negative space to evoke the feeling of emptiness, especially on Charlie's side later on in the film, and then you have the aspect of whether we are looking up or down at characters. What do we feel for them? Sad or fearful? These are all things Ryan had to consider, but still do it in a subtle enough way as to not draw much attention to it. Before we dive into the actual look of the film, let's take a look at some of the films Ryan looked at for inspiration. First of all, we have Persona, which, considering the amount of portrait shots and inventive blocking, isn't too much of a surprise, although in my opinion, Persona inspires most cinematographers in their work. Second of all, Carnal Knowledge, with its use of a spotlight to reveal a lead character in the story, in this case Nicole, where she emerges from darkness on a stage. Another reference he noted was Cries and Whispers for its observational camera style and atmospheric use of natural light. But what does this all mean in terms of look? And what does this mix of lighting style, movement, composition and colour create? Well, like I just mentioned, quite an observational one. We feel like we're in the room with these characters, we aren't too separated from them, and even when they are just talking, it doesn't feel too orchestrated, but we don't properly feel as though we're with them as a character. As for the stereotypical look of the film, I'd say it's pretty naturalistic, which covers a broad range of styles, so let me go a bit deeper. First of all, let's touch on this lighting, because when it comes to cinematography, on the most basic level, we have two styles: natural looking lighting and artistic looking lighting. Obviously, most films are sort of in the middle because unless someone extremely talented like Ryan is shooting our project, natural light won't always look the best, but it really adds to the aura of the film when you can pull it off properly. But there's also this sense of heightened realism from the use of shooting on film, as this isn't how we see the world. The colours are more exaggerated, we have grain, blacks aren't as deep as they would otherwise be, and there's never a perfect white. But these are all things that just happen when you shoot on film, which, as we discovered earlier, is exactly what Ryan was after. Now, in order to compare it to Baumbach's other films, I'm going to look at ones with a similar story. No Francis Ha, no Greenberg, no Mistress America. I want to look at the Merowitz stories, which was shot by Ryan, and The Squid and the Whale, shot by Robert Yeoman, because these are both to do with families, divorce, and they look pretty similar. To start off with The Squid and the Whale, we can directly correlate the look of the cinematography to Marriage Story through the lighting, even though these were shot by completely different cinematographers. The lighting feels similar in how it's natural looking and rather raw, although the film as a whole seems a bit darker. Something about The Squid and the Whale though is that it was actually shot on 16mm, giving it a more raw and natural look straight from the camera. Then we get to the Merowitz stories. This was again shot on 16mm, or more specifically Super 16, the difference between the two being that the Super 16 frame is about 20 to 40% larger, and fun fact, the native aspect ratio is 1.66 to 1, the same of Marriage Story. However, we know Marriage Story went with 35. But more about the look, this sort of gave Baumbach and Ryan the opportunity to work together and figure out their style before going into something like Marriage Story. We see the more fluid camera movement, pretty realistic and natural lighting, and of course Adam Driver. So I think after looking at these two films, it's safe to say that Baumbach has had a very specific style for quite some time, but with each cinematographer comes a new elevation, whether that's in the movement, colour or lighting. So what have we learned today? Well, if you want the film look, start with film, because then you can shoot in natural light and it will look spectacular. In all seriousness though, we know that you don't need to fill up a room with artificial light if you aren't going for that look. Moving the camera doesn't need to be complicated, and maybe all you need to do is pick it up. Watch Persona if you haven't already, and Noah Baumbach has a very distinct visual style that doesn't necessarily need the same cinematographer every time. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. Not sure if you did. If a recommendation or an analysis, leave it down below. Thanks so much for watching, and maybe I'll see you next time. Bye! Also, it'd be great if you let me know how this new mic sounds. Thanks.